did it. Those are the words of Amanda Hayes. Those aren't the words of Amanda Hayes to one of her foes. It's not the words of Amanda Hayes to someone who has an agenda against her. Those are the words of Amanda Hayes to her own sister. Laura's dead. I did it. I want to talk to you today about three main principles that are the three main principles of the state's argument. And the first is that Amanda Hayes and Grant Hayes did this murder together. You've heard about all that evidence, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The second thing that I want to address with you is that this murder was premeditated. And then the third thing I want to talk to you about is the fact that Amanda Hayes' story makes zero sense when you look at all the evidence. And those are the main issues that I want to talk with you about today. We're limited to 2 hours, and so I'm going to try to talk for less than an hour, so I'll finish around 1 o'clock. But it's hard to focus on those elements because the defendant's story is so ridiculous. It's hard to pay attention to what the state's argument is when the defendant is stretching every little thing past what the truth was. You just heard the defendant's counsel say there's been no effort by Amanda to conceal anything from anyone. You just heard him say that there's no evidence that Amanda participated in this murder. Yet you also heard from Karen Berry that Amanda Hayes said, "Laura's dead, I did it." That's a bell you can't unring. And you also heard from Dr. Ginger Calloway, who months before this murder happened had the opportunity to talk to both Laura Ackerson, the victim in this case, and Grant and Amanda Hayes. And you heard that when Dr. Calloway spoke with them, you heard her say that Amanda and Grant's wishes were to travel around the country and to have sole custody so they weren't tied down to Kinston. And she went on to say that those actions would effectively erase Laura. And that's before this murder happened. And so, as we begin, I want to talk about some of these coincidences that Amanda Hayes speaks to. And as you heard, there's Amanda Hayes and her sister Karen Berry at her house where she said, "Laura's dead, I did it." And under the defendant's version of events, after she finds out that Laura Ackerson's been murdered, after their brainstorming sesh where they go and try to figure out how to get rid of this body and the solutions, after that, that's Amanda Hayes, smiling with this man she's terrified of. And you saw a series of those pictures. And ladies and gentlemen, this isn't about Amanda Hayes, and it's not about Grant Hayes. It's about Laura Ackerson. And it's about what these folks did to her. It's about the fact that during this custody battle, it got heated, and Laura went over for a midweek visit during July 13th. And that was something that was very rare. You heard about what a wreck the prior July 13th meeting was. And you heard that when Laura went over there, you heard some of the voicemail from when she talked to her friend Oksana. You heard the trepidation in her voice as she talked about how nervous she was. She said, "I don't know what's going to happen over there." But for some reason, she went in that door. And that reason is that Amanda Hayes, who talked to her that afternoon at 3:30, baited her with her children. So I want to talk about some of these coincidences. If you believe Amanda's story for some reason, the coincidences that you have to believe. The first coincidence is that there's a huge bleach stain inside the front door of that house where she's alleged to have committed murder. But actually, it's not because a murder was done there. It's because her little boys kicked over a bucket of bleach. I guess it's a coincidence also that the day after the murder, she's frenetically cleaning up, so much so that she calls her own daughter over and says, "You got to take these kids out of here. I need you here now." But that's just a coincidence. She just was moving, and that's why she had this urgency in her voice. And there's Shay and that vacuum cleaner behind her. This bathroom. It's just a coincidence that Amanda Hayes happened to buy electrical tape because she needed it for her painting, even though she was allegedly moving. But she needed it for her painting, and it wasn't to tape down all these tarps and huge pieces of plastic that they used to keep the blood off that bathroom. It's a coincidence that after she did this, after she bought bleach to hide the murder that just happened, it's a coincidence that despite not being involved at all, not having any idea what's going on, she then confessed to murdering Laura Ackerson to her sister. It's a coincidence that in the back of that truck, every time they went different places as part of the move to get rid of all the evidence in this, Amanda told you, oh no, I didn't see that. When Grant brought the acid out to put in the back of the truck, I was facing forward. I didn't know that was happening. When I was in the boat, I was facing backwards on the boat so that I didn't see anything of what happened. I could hear splashes, such as when her head was put in the water. It's a coincidence that even though she wasn't involved with this acid at all, she's the person that's seen dropping that acid down and putting it out there at that roadside. It's another coincidence that when she goes down to Texas, that her phone is off almost that entire Sunday. And you heard Detective Heckman testify. And to set the record straight, you all heard and knew this better than defendant's counsel, that the 7651 number was Amanda Hayes' phone number. That 7651 number was the number that had Grant's mom in there as Grant's mom. And then the other phone, the 8581, had Shay's written in there, whereas in this phone, it was Shayster, which apparently is a nickname for Amanda. But you heard about when they were trying to track this mobile number, how they couldn't track 7651 because it kept on being turned on and off all day. But I guess that's just a coincidence. And then she gets up there and says, yeah, it's actually because we're trying to conserve the battery. Another coincidence that despite being in the back of that boat as these body parts are being laid out and it being nearly a full moon out, she couldn't see anything because according to her, there were trees. You heard the way she described that. She said she was afraid of the animal noises out there. She wasn't afraid of Grant Hayes. She was afraid of the animals out there. And then perhaps the most ridiculous part of the defendant's assertions are that she was terrified when this was going on. And you saw those pictures from her own camera of her, how she appeared. And here, we sought to bring this evidence out from this witness stand and put it to the light of this courtroom so you can see what's going on. What we didn't do is claim things that there's no basis for. You heard the defendant say, yeah, her body was dismembered in Kinston. There's zero evidence of that at all. And so here you can see Amanda on that Monday. She's smiling. She appears happy, which is sort of creepy because you've heard all this evidence about how she's dismembered a body by that point and it's gotten down to Texas. And here she is on that Tuesday. And just from this picture, defendant's counsel wants you to think, oh, she's terrified for her life because she's got a furrowed brow in this picture. Maybe it's because she's about to go on a boat ride where she's about to take a human being that she cut up and throw them into water into Texas Creek. And then, of course, later that day, you see her come out with this acid, and defendant's counsel put forward some evidence about that she wasn't able to lift heavy things because she had just had a C-section. She sure didn't struggle at all with taking this acid out. You see her unloading it from that truck, and this is on July 20th. And there's that boat. And she tried to claim to you that she didn't know what was going on in the boat. At some point, her credibility is a major issue in this case for you. Because in order to find her not guilty, you have to believe what she said from this witness stand. And that boat, you saw the boat, you saw how long it was. You saw it was around 12 feet long, which I measured out earlier. It's about from here to about the end of the defendant's table right here. And those 12 feet, these are the small coolers. These coolers are stacked up in that boat. Her hands were bloody with Laura Ackerson's body that night. In this small space, in that boat, there were 2 more of these coolers. So there's no, Grant just put down plastic, and when I came into the boat, I didn't see anything. And in order for that to happen, Grant Hayes would have had to pick up the body parts out of the coolers and walk across the street with them and down to this landing. And in that boat, she again testified that she was facing backwards, which makes no sense. And you heard that they went downriver. You saw where the body was put. And if she's facing backwards, when Grant is, what you believe is Grant's putting body parts in the water over here, she would be at this end watching them float by. And it's disgusting, and it's inhumane, and it's an abhorrent crime. It's wretched. And there's not enough adjectives to describe it, but it's what she did. And then she has the gall to come in here and say that this is all a coincidence. So I want to talk a little bit about the premeditation aspect. The judge is going to instruct you on the law, and don't believe if I say something that you don't recognize when you go back there, or if Mr. Gaskin said something that is different than what the judge instructs you. Follow what the judge instructs you, and that goes for the evidence as well. So if you write down something in your notes and I say something different or Mr. Gaskin says something different, please go by your notes, because that's the evidence in this trial. But as we skip forward a little bit, and here are these pictures, of course, from Amanda in that hotel room. This is a woman that is under duress. And here you can see the cooler in the back corner of this picture. And here you can see Amanda under duress, terrified for her life, afraid of what's going on, smiling the whole time. They took pictures. Not only did they cut up this body and take it to Texas and throw it in a creek after murdering Laura, they took pictures along the way. That's the type of people that you're dealing with in this case. And defendant's counsel wants to pin this whole thing on Grant Hayes. And that maneuver is so that you don't think about Amanda at all. What you have in this case are two people who together participate in this murder. And so what Amanda does is horrible, and what Grant does is horrible. And at no point in this trial have we minimized Grant's role in this. Grant had motive, just as Amanda did. Grant took an active role in this. The guy went out and bought a saw on the early morning hours of July 14th to dismember the body. Grant was incredibly involved in this, but they did this together. And that's what the law is going to tell you when you go back there to deliberate, is whether they acted in concert. And so part of the law that you're going to be asked to deliberate about is this premeditation. What separates first-degree murder from second-degree murder is, was there premeditation and deliberation? And in order to look at this premeditation, you have to look at all the evidence. And some of it is circumstantial, and some of it is direct evidence. And the judge is going to explain to you the difference between those two laws. And I'll probably read it to you so I get it perfectly accurate. But the judge will tell you that there's two types of evidence from which you may find the truth as to the facts of a case: direct and circumstantial. Direct evidence is the testimony of one who asserts actual knowledge of a fact, such as an eyewitness. So Karen Berry can say, I saw Amanda walk me back to the septic tank looking for a place to put the body. Circumstantial evidence is proof of a chain or group of facts and circumstances indicating the guilt or innocence of the defendant. And the judge will tell you that the law makes no distinction between the weight to be given to these two types of evidence. The best way I can describe circumstantial evidence is last Wednesday, if you were standing outside and you saw snow coming down, you could say it was snowing. If you went to bed on Tuesday night and when you woke up on Wednesday morning, there was snow on your lawn, circumstantially you would know that it snowed the night before. Now, technically, somebody could have brought a snow machine and put it on your lawn, but that makes no sense. And that's the same thing that you're going to be asked to do here, is be reasonable and determine if there's a reasonable doubt as to what happened. But as part of this premeditation, you heard about Grant's premeditation. Of course, he wrote a song about killing Laura Ackerson called Broomstick Rider. And these two people despised Laura Ackerson. You heard that. This custody dispute was getting meaner and meaner. You heard some of the animosity between Amanda and Laura. And the state doesn't have to prove to you that Amanda hated Laura more than Grant did. That's not an element. That's not something that we have to prove. And the truth is that Laura felt happy that Amanda was in Grant's life so that there was someone to take care of these kids. Because as you heard in Texas, Karen Berry said Amanda was the one looking after the kids, which is another reason why Amanda's whole argument that she's under duress this whole time and that Grant's going to do something to her children makes no sense, because her children are safe the whole time with Karen Berry. Meanwhile, she's out with Grant and she can go elsewhere, she can go run, she can go ask for help. When she's dropping this acid, you saw that she's in the truck by herself. She had multiple availabilities to go and flee what she claimed was a situation marked with duress, and she didn't do that. And that's not to say that folks that are involved in domestic violence situations always avail themselves of opportunities to free themselves from their abuser, but there's zero evidence to show that this woman and this man were in a domestic violence situation. So going back to the premeditation, one of the biggest parts biggest keys to the premeditation, I would argue to you, is this note that's found in this apartment. That was State's Exhibit 77. And we had a handwriting expert come, and they testified that Lindsay Dinn testified that the top half appeared to be Grant Hayes' handwriting, and the bottom half appeared to be Laura Ackerson's handwriting. And this is where it's found. And note what's on top of it: a Chick-fil-A book. And so Amanda Hayes says, I didn't have any involvement with this. But what that note says is the exact opposite of what Laura Ackerson would have ever done in this case. Remember that the top half of this note says that I, Laura Ackerson, for the sum of $25,000, agreed not to pursue custody of the 2 minor children. That's completely opposite anything that Laura would have done. And you heard that from everyone in this case. From John Sargent, from Heidi, from Siobhan, from Dr. Calloway. Everyone said how much Laura loved these kids. As a matter of fact, I think you heard Oksana say that Laura lived for her children. And so here she is giving away custody of her kids for $25,000, which is completely opposite of what would happen. So there's a question that should be in your mind. What happened with this note? Was there some sort of duress that made Laura sign this? And then, to rebut that, on the bottom part of this note is this: by notifying counsel John Sargent of our arrangement less the monetary compensation, I understand I'll be able to see my kids when I want at the discretion of their father. Laura never would have done that and said, you know what, I'll give up on this custody exchange, the custody dispute, which is going great for me, and I'm going to get more custody of these children. But instead, I'm going to let Grant have custody of them, and I'll just be allowed to go see them whenever I want. And even the language down here, I understand that I will be able to see my kids when I want at the discretion of their father. Those are words that you heard from his parenting history. Laura Ackerson never would have agreed to that. At the discretion of their father. This man has been vilified. He's practically been called a serial killer in the defendant's argument. Laura never would have agreed to that. And then you also heard some testimony about the date down here has these slash marks. But in her diary and journal, and Ms. Holt's going to talk about this, how it appears different. And then most importantly about this note, I'd ask you, why do we find this note? Why is it still in that apartment? Everything else from that apartment that has Laura's blood on it, like those gloves, is gone. They throw everything else out. Why do we find it there? And I'd offer to you the reason that we find it in this apartment is because it makes it look like Laura Ackerson fled. It makes Laura Ackerson look like she got $25,000 and she's gone. She took the money and ran. And so the question before you is, if when this note was written, it was designed to make Laura Ackerson look like she fled, then at the time that this note was written, Grant and Amanda Hayes had the intent to kill her. And they had that necessary premeditation. And to go over that again, just to simplify it. So this note, when we find it, is there because it shows that Laura took off. And they want Laura to look like she disappeared because they have destroyed and obliterated her body so badly that they think she'll never be found. And so when this note was written, they had the intent to make it look like Laura disappeared, and Laura's handwriting is on there. So if they knew that they wanted Laura to disappear as they're writing this note, they had premeditated about killing Laura. And honestly, I was going to spend a lot more time on premeditation, but I've got only a half an hour left, and I want to focus on some of the defendant's assertions because they're so ridiculous and farcical. Just because a question was asked to a witness doesn't mean that it's evidence in this case. So you heard some questions lobbed up. Oh, is it a wink and a nod? Is that why this plea was done? Or did you find the chainsaw in the house? This is a reciprocating saw. And just because the word chainsaw is thrown out, that's done to get in your mind that it was a loud noise. And that's the purpose of asking questions like that. And so when folks say no, it's not evidence in this case. And that takes us to those properties in Kinston, which was another sort of farcical attempt at explaining away what Amanda had done. When you think about those properties in Kinston, and of course, their investigator did absolutely nothing to prove that they existed. And then we brought Patsy Hayes out to, again, hold up to the light whether this existed or not. And she gets on the witness stand and she says, yeah, we have those rental properties, but they were all occupied. 2 were by some sisters, and then 1 was by this family, and there were 4 vacant lots. And so defendant, upon getting that idea that Grant dismembered the body in Kinston blown up, they say, oh, well, maybe it was done in one of those vacant lots. Maybe it was done outside in the middle of one of those vacant lots, which is ridiculous because that saw doesn't have a battery in it. So you would need a really big extension cord to go out to one of those vacant lots and dismember a body. And if there was any truth to that, defendant's counsel would have put on evidence of that, and they have no burden. And let me be very clear about that. The burden is upon the state of North Carolina to prove everything to you beyond a reasonable doubt. They have no burden. But for instance, with that Crime Stoppers tip and all the technology that we have, and there wasn't any evidence about what the Raleigh Police Department did to follow up with that Crime Stoppers tip, and we're limited to arguing to you what the evidence was in the trial, but you can use common sense and figure out how that could be followed up. You also heard about these continued efforts to insert sociopath into this trial. For instance, with their investigator, where he had a outline of what the Stepford Wives were about or what the Talented Mr. Ripley was about, and inserted into there was that word sociopath that was changed from the rest of that outline that had been spoken of. And Grant Hayes is a terrible person. There is no dispute from this side of the room. You heard that months ago he was convicted of first-degree murder, and we sat here and did that. And now the time has come for Amanda Hayes to face justice. And remember, the defendant told you in his opening, or in her opening by Mr. Gaskins, that they're going to tell you with precision where Grant killed Laura and where he dismembered Laura, with precision. And the only thing that they have to rely on is that AccuRent report, which is not a police database, but instead is a rental history of folks. And that's what they point to be the accurate measure. And on the front of that report, you heard Mr. Palmer read, important, this is rife with errors, and went on to say several things that need to be independently verified. And it can't be independently verified because it's wrong. So then we can talk about another one of the defendant's main assertions, which is the sympathy card. Of course, Mr. Gaskins brings up that Amanda could face life in prison. And why does he bring that up to you? Does that have any relevance to this case whatsoever? No. It's solely done so in the back of your head you have sympathy, and you think about that as you go back to the jury room. The judge is going to instruct you that this isn't about sympathy. And it's not about, you're not going to convict Amanda Hayes because you're mad about what happened to Laura Ackerson. You're not going to be controlled by anger. You're going to find her guilty because the evidence supports and shows that she participated in this murder. And they continue that sympathy argument. Mr. Gaskins got up here and talked about how Amanda cared for Nikki and all that evidence about her work in children's theater. Again, that's just to get in the back of your head to try to draw some sympathy. And then the biggest argument by the defense is Amanda's over here and bought bleach and participated in this murder, but let's ignore her and let's just focus on Grant Hayes over here and how bad he was. Even though they're both involved in this murder, they're both involving acting in concert, let's focus on Grant Hayes. And that was the majority of that argument you just heard, was Grant Hayes is a terrible person. And they try to construe that to say that that Amanda was under duress, which again is obliterated by the evidence that comes out from that camera, where you see her smiling, and from Detective Falk's testimony that when they first get picked up on that search warrant on the next Friday night, they're walking in, Amanda Hayes is rubbing Grant's back. And then if you don't believe that, you got to see Amanda Hayes' own words that in 2012 she was writing love letters to Grant Hayes. The only way she could get him there is through Patsy Hayes, so the state had to call the mother of the other defendant that we just convicted and put her on the witness stand. And surely she's not our favorite witness, and she testified to the truth that, yeah, Amanda was sending these letters to Grant about how much she loved him. Another thing that was brought up with zero evidentiary support, Laura Ackerson made that phone call at 4:59 p.m. and it bounced off that tower, and you've seen that tower. I'm not going to go back through that. And then she gets to Grant and Amanda's house at probably 5:15 or 5:20, depending on traffic. But that puts Amanda in a pretty rough spot, because then she's sitting at home for 4 hours before she goes to Chick-fil-A with Laura's dead body and them trying to figure out what they're going to do. And so the defendant needs to move that timeline back. So they pull that picture from Laura's car where there's the food tray, and they say that has to come from Crabtree Valley Mall. Surely it couldn't have come from any of the other 3 restaurants that she went to earlier that day when she was meeting with folks. You heard you heard from Randy Jenkins from Bill's Grill, and you heard about all the other places she went. But the defendant says that's the key, and so they stretch the truth out and try to say that tray is evidence that she got there much later. And I want to play for you. We played the recording from Grant Hayes to Patsy Hayes, where he leaves this message, and I'll play this for you right now. And there's a little bit of dispute over whether Grant Hayes says that the boys are going to be moving in with Patsy and Grant Sr. And I just want to play that for you. Defendant's counsel said that it was just Amanda, Grant, and Lily that were going to move. And pay close attention to what you heard in this exhibit.
Hey, Mom, it's Grant. Me and Amanda and Lily are going to move in with you guys.
And there you could hear it, and the boys at the end of that. So obviously the boys were going to move as well. And that's the first time that this idea is brought up about moving to Kinston. And you saw in these pictures from Grant and Amanda's house how they hadn't packed anything up. Yet on that Thursday, they're frenetically cleaning for some reason. You also heard about, this is a different black area rug, and I believe this is State's Exhibit 464. And that's the corner where this fight that Amanda claims that she sees, this is where that happened, which is not very close to where those chairs are. But the black rug on that Thursday, Amanda claims, is not there anymore. Shay doesn't say anything about that, but Amanda claims that it wasn't there. And so what's more believable? That Grant Hayes walked out of that apartment with a dead body wrapped in a carpet, or that she was dismembered in this bathroom that is bleached so much that bleach is sticking out of the corners. And there that you see that black rug is missing from under that table. And again, I'd offer you saw Grant Hayes as a 5'5" guy. That's a task to pull that rug out from under that table by yourself. And I would offer to you that Amanda helped him with that. But either way, that's not what the state's relying on. Sketchy evidence like that. We're not saying that because the black rug is gone under the table that proves definitively anything. That's just one portion of the case. And as we move on, you heard about Amanda Hayes and these trips and what she claimed happened. And going back to this corner of the apartment, is that on the far left of this picture, she claims that's where this fight occurred. You heard about Laura Ackerson. You heard Dr. Calloway testify that Laura was kind of a stiff, intense person, and that she was the opposite of aggressive. But defendant's counsel wants you to believe that Laura instigated a fight after asking to see Amanda's baby. So what Amanda claims is that this fight occurred in this area over here, by this wall. And then somehow Laura trips over a chair that's all the way over here, which I guess that could be possible, that they could have grappled all the way over here. But Amanda says that she goes to the bedroom with the boys afterwards. So she's not just diving in this bedroom. She's going to this bedroom over there. And then you heard this argument or idea that Amanda said that Grant took Laura into this bathroom that, according to them, is covered in feces and has been sealed off for the rest of the apartment. Another coincidence. That in the bathroom where Laura was dismembered, they just coincidentally claimed that Grant and Amanda Hayes, that it was Gentle's fault, the feces had gotten in there. But in order for Laura and Grant to get in there, or for Amanda to walk out that way, they would have had to pass each other. And for Amanda to walk out of this bathroom, she has to walk past this front door. And it's just a comical assertion that Amanda didn't know exactly what was happening in this tiny apartment. And so we've already addressed some of the issues about going to Kinston, but there's zero evidence to show that Grant went to Kinston. And this whole thing, remember, was instigated by the defendant's claim that these deposit slips, one of them was made by Grant Hayes in Kinston. And so on July 14th, yes, there is a deposit for $350 from Kinston. And this is State's Exhibit 581. And you can see the handwriting on that one versus State's Exhibit 583, which is July 15th, where the deposit in Raleigh. They're totally different handwriting. And that's because, as you heard testify from this witness stand, Grant Hayes' mom made that deposit. So there is, again, zero evidence that Grant went to Kinston. And even further, his cell phone, Grant and Amanda's cell phones, are every cell phone tower that is being used and bounced off of is being documented in these phone records. And we'll get to the phone records in a minute, but there's no cell phone tower in Kinston that either of those phones bounced off of. And defendant's counsel said Grant Hayes was on the phone 24 hours a day. Yet again, no cell phone towers in Kinston. So then, after after Grant and Laura allegedly get in this fight and trip over this chair onto the carpet in this apartment right here, that gives her enough of a head injury that it's seen in her decapitated head nearly a week or 11 days later. Then Amanda, at this moment, this is the biggest issue in their life. This custody dispute is the biggest thing. It's bitter, it's controlling their lives, it's controlling where they live. And Grant, I guess, just disposes with Laura's body, and then Amanda just doesn't ask about it. Just assumes she's okay, and on this entire 29-hour ride to Texas, never asks anything about Laura. According to her, Laura doesn't show up on that Friday, but again, that's just a coincidence, and she's not troubled by it, even though this is the biggest issue in their lives. Meanwhile, they have this note that says that they get to keep custody of the boys, but she doesn't really mention that. Also, there's a saw manual in her house, and you heard about that. Presumably, there's also a saw in this house as she's been dismembered, and that went out in the trash in that dumpster, and you heard that by the time detectives got there, Amanda and Grant had nearly a 6 or 7 day head start, and so it was buried under 10 feet of trash. And so Amanda's just okay that Laura needed EMS, but she's not going to ask anything more about that. And then Amanda's story from that Wednesday night is so confusing that even defendant's counsel couldn't get it right. So Amanda claims that she leaves and drives around, and she doesn't go to Chick-fil-A first. I'm correcting this for defendant's counsel. She goes to Wendy's first for some reason because she knows that Monkey Joe's is closed. So she has to leave. Monkey Joe's, you heard, closes at 7. So the time that she's allegedly driving around is after 7 o'clock. So at this point, she's been with this body for around 2 hours. But for some reason, Laura and Grant, I guess, were talking for a long period of time between 5:15 and 7 o'clock when she leaves. And then she comes back and sees Laura's car is still there, so she leaves again. And again, blaming it on the boys, says that Gentler Grant was hungry, and so they go to Chick-fil-A. And you saw that Chick-fil-A video. And the important part of that Chick-fil-A video is she buys food for Grant Hayes. He's at home. What has happened that night, and Ms. Holt's going to talk more about what actually happened. The past couple days of this trial, we've been spending on Amanda's version of the story. And Ms. Holt's going to talk about exactly what happened. But what happened that day is not that Amanda Hayes was driving around for 2 hours with those kids. It was that she went to Chick-fil-A so they could figure out what to do about this body that they had in their house. And then later that night, Grant went to buy this saw. And in chilling video, which we will readily admit to, Grant is buying the saw very calm. And that's the same thing you notice about Amanda. All this is very calm and deliberate. And so let's move on to these assertions by the defendant. Of course, the bleach is another huge issue in this trial. And that is that Amanda says she had no idea what's going on, but 24 hours after Laura's killed, she's in a grocery store buying bleach. What could be more damning than buying bleach, which is obviously used throughout this apartment? And if we skip forward to these phone records, Amanda Hayes swore to you under oath that night she was called by Grant Hayes when she was going to that store, and he said, we need some bleach. Will you pick up some bleach? So this is, you can see the line numbers. This is State's Exhibit 79. This is one that Mr. Gaskins encouraged you to take back. We won't object to that either, but it's going to be done outside your presence, so if it doesn't get back there, you won't know who objected to it. But regardless, on July 14th, here's the beginning of the day. And let's talk a little bit about these phone records from July 13th. So this is Laura's phone call, line 58 at 4:59 p.m. At line 59, here's Grant checking his voicemail, or Amanda checking her voicemail, since this is Amanda's phone. Remember, it's Amanda's voicemail, so she's the one checking it. But regardless, I guess if this is Amanda's phone and she's checking her voicemail, that somehow makes her a drug dealer. And then there's these 2 calls, and then here, Grant and Amanda at 6:37 and 6:49 call Laura. And these are short phone calls. And it would be great to have Laura's cell phone and know what those voicemails that Grant and Amanda said, but we don't have those. You know that Laura took a recorder with her everywhere she went. And when she was in that apartment that night, you know she was recording what happened. And you also know that there is a recording of this murder somewhere that we will never find. And here, as the night goes on, the 6639, again, is Grant's mother's phone number. So that's presumably Grant using the cell phone at 6:59. There's some more phone calls. And Grant talks to his mom here allegedly for 6 minutes and 23 seconds. You know, and Amanda says, well, I heard Grant say to his mom, I'll see you tomorrow. Grant's mom did not testify to that. She said she didn't remember any phone calls from that night. And again, this is a defendant who's already been convicted of first-degree murder and spending life in prison. That's his mom on the witness stand, not probably our first witness we wanted to call. And so the night goes on, and we're into July 14th, and we'll talk about the 8581 number, but you heard defense counsel say that 8581 number, Grant's number, wasn't activated until 10 p.m. on Thursday. So how is there a phone call for Laura to pick up Bleach on that Thursday evening? So here's the calls throughout the day, and there's a couple phone calls to Shay in here. I believe it's this 8628 number. You see these multiple phone calls to Shay. And moving back, I guess, to the beginning of July 14th, here are these two phone calls at 9:48 and 9:58 of Amanda calling Shay and saying, you need to get over here, and you need to get over here now. Again, this is just a coincidence. They just happen to be frenetically packing and cleaning that day. Not because they murdered someone in their house, but because it just seemed like a good time to start packing up. And then later in this day, you see some other phone calls. This 5404 number, I believe, was Lauren Harris, the Monkey Joe's staffer. And that goes on through the rest of the day. And you heard Lauren Harris's testimony about how Monkey Joe's was canceled later that afternoon when Grant said that the kids weren't coming. And she texted him back and forth. And the texts aren't on here. They're on later on in this document. And you can look at those as well. But the most important part of this is as we get down to the end, lines 96, 97, and 98, you saw on the timestamp from that video that Amanda Hayes is leaving the Target after buying bleach at 5:32 p.m. And there is no phone call to her phone at 5:32 p.m. Why is she saying that? Is it because this was an accident, or is it because this was a premeditated murder? Here's the rest of July 14th, so you can see, I'm not telling you this, you can see on the actual evidence that 8581 number doesn't make appearance all the way down until later in the night. I don't want to hit Miss Godwin in the head, but it's right here on line 118, you see right there at 11:48. And then moving on to this is the 8581 number, and this is the first call, is at 10:33 that night. And Grant's using that phone. So she bought bleach, and then it's not my job to tell you that Amanda lied. That's up to you to judge her credibility. But there you can see the evidence contradicts what she says. And so now I want to talk a little bit about the elements since I'm running low on time. But first-degree murder is on the table. Mr. Gaskins told you it wasn't on the table. The judge is going to tell you first-degree murder is on the table. And these are the elements that act intentionally and with malice, approximate cause of death, and we'll go through these quickly. But the judge is going to send you back with these instructions, so you don't have to rely on me telling them to you. But the biggest issue is this acting in concert, that you know that this team of Amanda and Grant Hayes committed this murder. And this reads that the state in case relies upon this legal theory, which is that for a person to be guilty of a crime, it is not necessary that she herself personally do all of the acts necessary to constitute the crime. For instance, if they have this plan, Grant's going to kill Laura, and Amanda's job is to move the children into the other room, that would be acting in concert by being part of that plan. And what this says is that if two people act together with a common purpose to commit the crime of first-degree murder, and each is present at the time the first-degree murder is committed, then each of them is held responsible for the acts committed by the other and is guilty of first-degree murder. So to break that down further, if they both have this common purpose for this first-degree murder to exist, which you've heard a little bit about the premeditation, and each is present, and Amanda Hayes admitted she was present that night, then each of them is held responsible for the act committed by the other and is guilty of first-degree murder. And so moving on to intentionally with malice, that Amanda Hayes, this first element that you have to satisfy is that Amanda Hayes, acting in concert with Grant, intentionally and with malice killed Laura Ackerson. And the judge will go on to tell you that it's the condition of mind that prompts a person to take the life of another intentionally. And it's hatred, ill will, or spite. You heard Patricia Barakat say Amanda despised Laura. And you're going to hear from more of Laura's diary about how she felt like Grant and Amanda just tried to ignore her and eliminate her from their lives. And that's important to recognize, that motive is in Amanda Hayes' head. Approximate cause of death, again, she didn't die of an accident. Falling on carpet wouldn't cause that head injury, but regardless, that head injury wasn't what killed her. What killed her was either the stab wound to her throat or some sort of asphyxiation. And then we have to show an intent to kill. And the judge will tell you that that's seldom provable by direct evidence. It's ordinarily proven by circumstantial evidence. And you can infer this from the nature of the defendant's acts, so Amanda and Grant Hayes, how they acted, the manner in which it was made, so what they did to this body afterwards. This wasn't a situation where Laura was killed and then the body was just thrown in a lake or something along those lines. There was a deliberate effort to cut off her arms, cut off her legs, cut her torso in half, and then finally to cut her head off so they would fit in these coolers. The kind of depraved mind like Amanda and Grant to do that shows you that this murder wasn't just an accident. You don't cut somebody's body up and drive it halfway across the country if it was an accident. Premeditation, we talked about this already, formed the intent to kill the victim before acting, some period of time, however short. And that brings us back to that note. So if Laura was signing that note, and remember the other part of that note, if Laura was signing that note and Grant and Amanda, and she had a recording, it said, "Ha, I got you," and Grant and Amanda say, "Oh, now we need to kill her," that period of premeditation satisfies the elements of this. It doesn't have to be a drawn out plan where you might say, well, why didn't they have a better plan? It just has to be a short moment of premeditation for Grant or Amanda to say, we can't let her walk out that door. And maybe that's why she's killed by that front door. And going back to that note, remember what the other parts that Lindsay Dinh testified to, that on the top left corner of the note, there was an indented writing, which means that this was the second draft, at least, of that note. And in the previous writing, you heard the words that they could make out on that. But that goes to show more premeditation there, that there was this indented writing, this thoughtful effort to try to get Laura to do something that she would never do. And then lastly, deliberation. That is that the defendants acted in a cool state of mind. And it doesn't mean a total absence of passion or emotion. It just means that the intent to kill was formed with a fixed purpose. It wasn't a suddenly aroused violent passion. And so even if you think that Grant and Laura, according to Amanda, for some reason if you believe Amanda, got into this fight, as long as there's a moment of a cool mind saying, I can't let her get out of this house, she has to die here, that would satisfy this deliberation. And neither of these, premeditation and deliberation, the judge is going to tell you that they're neither usually susceptible by direct proof, that it's usually the circumstances by which they may be proved. And the judge will instruct you on this, that you can look at a lack of provocation by a victim. Why would Laura Ackerson start this fight with Amanda Hayes when this whole custody dispute is finally going her way? She's in good shape. She's going to get this 2-2-3 period of shared custody, which you got to see Amanda Hayes' emotion when she was on that witness stand and she testified about that 2-2-3 setup for custody and how stupid she thought it was and how angry it made her. You can look at the conduct of the defendant, Amanda Hayes, before, during, and after the killing. Again, we don't have a lot of evidence about before. We know that Amanda talked to Laura before she got over there. We know that Grant left a message for his mom that afternoon. But you can look at what happened during and after the killing. So in order to find premeditation and deliberation, you can look at how deliberate these folks were in trying to get rid of this body. and the psychological idea that they had. Dismemberment isn't just about hiding from the police. It's about making a person disappear. The threats and declarations of the defendant, you heard Amanda in one of those recordings have some ill will towards Laura, and you also heard Grant have a lot of ill will towards Laura, which would show that they had this design on getting Laura out of their lives. The manner in which the killing was done, again, strangulation or stab wound, and then the means by which the killing was done, and then finally ill will between the parties. And second-degree murder, I'm going to skip through most of this because the big issue before you that's on the table is first-degree murder, whether they premeditated and deliberated. Second-degree murder would be that acting together, did it just happen without premeditation and deliberation? And then accessory after the fact of first-degree murder, again, is the situation where you find that only Grant Hayes committed the first-degree murder. Then the question before you will be whether Amanda Hayes knew that Grant Hayes had killed Laura, willfully, knowingly, intentionally assisted him in an attempt to escape detection, arrest, and punishment, and helped conceal evidence and dispose of dismembered body parts. And the big thing about this is you're not going to get to accessory after the fact of first-degree murder because you're going to start with first-degree murder and you're not going to get to second-degree murder. Only after that would you get to accessory after the fact. So those are the elements of this crime. And I want to address a couple other of the defendant's assertions, and I'm going to stick to the time period that I have. But the defendant brought up these duffel bags and all these things that Grant's purchasing. He's purchasing them here in Raleigh at Walmarts and Targets and all these places. If he was in Kinston this whole time, wouldn't he buy those items down there? And as to the assertion by defendant's counsel that cutting up a body is like cutting a tree limb, and that's how far down we've gone in this defense. You don't know that with two people dismembering a body that you would necessarily make indentions. And you also heard that detectives at this time weren't looking for indentions in this bathroom. What you did hear is that Grant Hayes bought a huge, huge plastic tarp and a whole bunch of plastic sheeting. And you heard that that was put down, you can construe that that was put down in that apartment and that that electrical tape was used to seal it off. I remember that picture, and I don't have it before you right now, but not only is there bleach by the front door, but there's also bleach leaking out of the bathroom. And that hasn't been explained either. And the reason why is because Amanda and Grant Hayes bought this bleach and they dumped bleach all over that bathroom. Mr. Gaskins gets up here and tries to tell you, well, luminol would still react with body fluids after they've had bleach poured in them. And you heard the testimony from these folks that are experts from the SBI. And you heard what they said, that bleach would destroy the body fluids that are left in there. And that the only thing that you would find evidence of is bleach, essentially. And that's what happened in this case. That bathroom is so clean that when Shay Elmer goes over there on the next Tuesday, July 19th, she has to open a window. It reeks so much of bleach. But Amanda Hayes says, yeah, I had no idea that anything was going on in that house. And then she argues that the hutch was put in the back of the U-Haul trailer and she couldn't see behind it. And there's always these other people that could have been involved. And that's how tenuous the case is for the defendant. That at the end of the day, the evidence is so comprehensive and so overwhelming that they have to say, yeah, some other guy jumped in and some other guy, even though Amanda was there at the storage facility and helped put the hutch into that truck. No, she didn't know what was going on. She was just sitting in the front seat and some other guy came up and put it in there. Or that one of Grant's goons helped him move the body out of the apartment. There's zero evidence of that whatsoever. And it's just an effort to throw everything up there and hope that it confuses you. You heard a lot about the acid that was dumped in Texas, and they say that Grant's credit card was used to buy these prepaid phones. And remember what was found in the trash? 2 prepaid phones. There were 2 boxes there, just like there were 2 respirators. Remember, 4 gloves in the trash that had Laura's DNA on it. And that's found in the trash weeks later, but that still shows that Laura's DNA, her blood, was in that apartment. And that's irrefutable. And just to touch on a couple other things, the wounds that you heard about from Dr. Bradish and that you heard from Dr. Mambo about, Again, that head injury wasn't the fatal wound. It was the stab to the neck. It was the strangulation. And when Amanda Hayes was on this witness stand, you got to see her abhorrence for Laura. And part of the way you got to see that is the defendant kept on bringing up that Laura was posing on the internet for men or something along those lines. Or that disparaging Laura. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why was that brought up 3 times? Why was it brought up in the closing? Because Amanda still has that much ill will towards Laura today. Imagine how she was back in July 13th. And how many times did Amanda Hayes from this witness stand say, honestly? Honestly, I can't remember. Honestly this. Honestly that. Focus on those things, because that's what your job is as a juror, is to listen to the evidence and determine what of it is believable. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have seen and heard a deliberate, orchestrated effort to avoid justice in this case by Amanda Hayes. From those 11 days of July 2011 to the past 4 weeks of this trial, Amanda Hayes has tried to duck justice. You heard that she's tried to put you on the wrong path, that she's tried to hide from justice, that she's tried to deceive it. And you know that justice screamed out when Laura was being murdered and dismembered in that apartment. You know that it waited for days and days as Laura's body was decomposing in that Texas creek. And you know that it covered its mouth when Amanda Hayes took this witness stand and swore to tell you the truth and told you what she told you. Ladies and gentlemen, today justice arrives. It is before you today, and it demands on behalf of law, reason, and the humanity of what happened to Laura, that you find Amanda Hayes guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, both of you. Ms. Gaskins took about 2 hours or so. Ms. Zellinger took about an hour, a little bit less. You got about an hour left. That's all. Okay. We're going to stop for lunch for an hour, come back. We'll finish Ms. Holt's argument. I'll spend 15 to 20 minutes charging you, and then you'll have the case. So you haven't heard it all. Keep an open mind. Don't form or express any opinion about the guilt or innocence defendant or anybody in controversy. Be careful about your conduct. Come on back in about an hour, and we'll finish this up. Thank you very much. Y'all are excused.